Inside the Birds is back. What's up, everybody? It's Geoff Mosher, Adam Caplan, and of course, we are rejoined again by Greg Cosell for part 3 of our 4-part NFC East Preview Series. We have done Washington, we have done New York, and it is time to move on to our friends from down south in Texas, the Dallas Cowboys. And we've got a lot to talk about with the Dallas Cowboys, Adam and Greg. It's a 53-man roster that I know our Eagles listeners may not like to hear this, but I think it's a pretty good one. And the only issue is, guys, they've had some pretty good 53-man rosters over the last few years, but the end result for them is always kind of the same, an early exit in the playoffs. So we'll get to all of that in a second. I want to remind everybody, Inside the Birds is powered, of course, by Ocean Casino Resort in Atlantic City. They are the exclusive Jersey Shore resort of Inside the Birds. So as we look at the Dallas Cowboys here, Greg and Adam, it is yet another team that has had some coaching change. We'll get into that. They now have a new offensive coordinator, just like Washington, just like the Eagles, and perhaps a new philosophy. But I want to go back to what I said about the 53 and get both Greg and Adam your opinions on this. I feel like this 53, with the additions they've made that we'll get into, I don't know if I'm ready to say they're right up there with the Eagles yet. The Eagles are still very good, but the Eagles had some significant losses on defense. I think Dallas answered its questions, its roster holes this offseason. Greg, when you look at this 53, do you think it's pretty competitive there for the division and maybe, in the playoffs?
Absolutely. It's a really good roster. Geoff, I think you kind of hit on the big question, and it's really on offense. What will their offense look like? Because Brian Schottenheimer is now the coordinator, but there's been a lot of talk that, and Adam, you may be able to address this as well. There's been a lot of talk that Mike McCarthy will be taking over a lot of the design and maybe even the play calling. I guess we don't know that for
sure. The latter
is
true. No, you're right. He's going to call the plays. Mike's going to call the plays.
Oh, is that definite?
My understanding is he's going to call the plays. Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, given that, it's going to look different than it has the last number of years with Kellen Moore, and obviously people are going to look back to McCarthy when he was with the Packers, but of course he had Aaron Rodgers. So I don't know exactly how to deal with that. I don't know what exactly that means, but it will look different. But it's a good offensive roster. I thought that, bringing in Brandon Cooks is a positive. To me, Michael Gallup is a key player in all this, because Michael Gallup, before he tore his ACL, was a really good boundary X receiver. And that's the single receiver to the short side of the field, usually on the backside of trips. Because while CeeDee Lamb is very, very good, I think CeeDee Lamb actually works best when he can be used as a motion guy, a movement guy, a slot guy. I think that's what he is at his best. I don't think he's a pure X receiver. So I think Gallup is an important piece to all this. And then I guess the other question becomes the running game. Does Mike McCarthy feel that the running game needs to be a bigger factor? And can Tony Pollard be the guy that handles that kind of volume? I mean, we know Tony Pollard is an explosive player coming off that's a pretty serious injury, Adam, wasn't it, that he had?
It was, yeah. Broken leg, I think.
Yeah, I mean, so again, I'm certainly not a doctor, so I don't know, but from what I've read, it's pretty serious. So, but the bigger question is, let's say he is healthy, what kind of run game will they have in terms of volume? Because Pollard, even though he's been really, really good the last couple of years and made explosive plays, I'm not sure he's really seen by anybody as a guy that is going to carry 22 times a week.
Yeah, Greg, on your point, I'm just going to add to that.
Yeah.
One note on Pollard, he only had 4 games last season of over 15 carries. So that goes right to what Greg's saying. We don't know if he could be a volume back, and they don't even have a number 2 running back. Deuce Vaughn's very small, Greg. Do you see him? What do you think?
Oh, yeah. I mean, he's a fun guy to watch,
okay.
and there's a place for him. And again, the comparison based on school and size was Darren Sproles, and we know Darren Sproles from his time in the league, obviously played in Philly, but before that, did really well with the Chargers. Deuce Vaughn could be that kind of player, but that's more of a complementary player who can be used in specific situations, which I'm sure they'll try to do that because he does have some explosive traits, but they really don't have a second back. Malik Davis is there. He saw some snaps last year. And again, we don't know what they think of him because I don't think the sample size is large enough to know whether he can carry 10 times a game or whether he's just a guy who's kind of a second back. We don't know that yet.
Let's get back to offensive philosophy, because I think this is the biggest question surrounding the Cowboys. Clearly, fellas, they made a change, allowing Kellen Moore go to Chargers. Is that where he is now? Yeah.
Right. Yes.
Because they felt like they needed something different. Adam, do you see this pairing of Brian Schottenheimer as the OC and Mike McCarthy as the play caller as signaling an era of a more conventional West Coast offense now?
Yes.
Okay.
100%.
And
it's it's Mike's offense. He's going to run, as I understand it, his old school West Coast offense. Greg could talk about what that may look like conceptually. Now the question would be, and this is on Greg's point about running. From what I've heard, they want to run the ball more, but I don't know because Pollard is not shown to be a volume back. Without Zeke, who was cut, now they haven't closed the door on him completely. That's the thing I struggle with. Well, you also now, as Greg mentioned earlier, they made the trade for Brandon Cooks. Are they going to be an 11 personnel team, 12 personnel team? That's another question. But yes, on your question, Geoff, there's no question that they're going to be an old school West Coast offense terminology and whatever that looks like. But the question is, though, with personnel, how they're going to use it.
Right. And that's, Geoff, if I could jump in, Adam just hit on a really good point there, really good point about personnel. Before I just respond to that, they did sign Ronald Jones. So, and Ronald Jones does have talent and theoretically could be used as a second back in a meaningful way. So we'll see how that plays out. But Adam's point about the 11 versus 12 is a really good point because they had two young tight ends a year ago that looked pretty good when they played, Jake Ferguson and Peyton Hendershot. And then they drafted Luke Schoonmaker out of Michigan in the second round, a player I particularly liked on tape. So when you do that, you don't draft a tight end in the second round to have him basically sit on the bench, So now, that comes back to Adam's point, and we don't really know the answer to this question at this time. I mean, obviously they're going to do both. Okay. Most teams, play out of 11, they play out of 12, some more than others. But, the Cowboys, if Gallup is healthy, have three pretty quality wideouts in Gallup, Lamb, and Cooks. And now, what is the percentage of 12 personnel that they will play, given that they drafted a quality tight end, who, by the way, is an outstanding blocker. He came from Michigan, and where you have to block in line, as you guys know. But he's also, there was a lot there as a receiver. That's one reason I liked him so much. There was so much more to develop as a receiver. It's just that he didn't get thrown the ball an awful lot because that's not the way Michigan plays.
Right.
So, these are questions that at this moment we don't know.
All right, so let's talk about what we do know and how that might impact the quarterback, Dak Prescott, who entered last year as one of the least intercepted quarterbacks in the game, and then finished last year with a season high, a career high, an NFL lead in interceptions. So I know, listen, an Eagle fan looks at that and says Dak stinks, Dak sucks, whatever. He's now turnover prone, but we know that there's more cause and effect here.
Sure.
Greg, in your estimation of watching tape, right? What was most responsible for Dak being turnover prone? And by the way, I know you're going to say this. I know there were probably a unusual or atypical number of balls that bounced off receivers' hands and into D-backs' hands, right? So we're not going to count those because that's not his fault. But in general, his interception rate was still high. Did you see something where he was forcing it? What did you see?
I mean, look, as I've said, and Adam knows this, I've talked about this for years, that interceptions, you have to look at each one individually. You can't just look at a number on a page. Right. Obviously, the number makes you go, wow, that's too many. And yeah, you can say that. It's too many. But, interceptions, when guys throw a lot of interceptions, Geoff, as you know, and Adam knows, they happen for a lot of different reasons. Sometimes, as you mentioned, they come because a ball gets tipped. Sometimes they come because a receiver drops, a good throw, it goes up in the air. Sometimes it happens because there's a bad read. Sometimes it happens because it's an inaccurate throw. All these things occurred. Now, in an ideal world, he's not going to do that again because he did not have a history of that prior to last year. Last year was kind of the exception. Now, he made some, I will say this, he did make some uncharacteristically poor reads. And obviously it's now a new offense. We'll see what happens. We'll see, how he's taught. From everything I've heard about Dak Prescott, and Adam, you can jump in. He's a incredibly hard worker, an incredibly smart guy, takes it really seriously. He's not one of those guys that just shows up and figures he can play. I think that he'll do whatever it takes. This gets back to your question, Geoff, about what's the offense going to look like. I don't think they want him dropping back 45 times a game. We saw a lot of that the last number of years where Prescott dropped back an awful lot. And I don't think they want that, not because he's not good enough. Dak Prescott has proven to be a quality NFL quarterback. That's not the point, but it's how you choose to play. And I don't think they want to be a team, a throw ball team. I don't think that's how Mike McCarthy sees what he wants this offense to be. Would you agree with that, Adam?
Yeah, I think, in fact, McCarthy's talked about running the football. They want to get back to doing that, but that's where the Pollard thing, when you take a macro view, you see so much talent on this team.
You do.
But what's the foundation? I know, Greg, you always talk about that. Well, what's the foundation of the team? Are they going to go back to Prescott? You mentioned the 3 receivers, the 2 tight ends. Okay, they got a good pass target group. Well, the tight ends have to develop, but then you got explosive Pollard. They give more of a spread. That I'm looking forward to this. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
How much do you think the addition of Brandon Cooks, who's 1,000 yards every year and has an element of explosion that we haven't seen leave yet, right, will impact Dak Prescott? Because there was and then I'll let you, Greg, do you believe that Michael Gallup's lack of explosion last year, coming back from the ACL, was a detriment to the offense and maybe could have possibly forced Dak to force the issue a little bit more?
I would answer that in the affirmative. Because that is such a key position, that boundary X receiver. And I had so many conversations at the combine with coaches that talked about that and the importance of that position. And as I said, while CeeDee Lamb is clearly a really good receiver, I don't think that's what he is. I know our buddy Jason Avant doesn't think he's a boundary X either. And because we talked about that during the season a number of times. So I remember Jason saying that for sure. And we both agree, Jason and I, that he's really good. He's just not that guy.
Right.
So ultimately, Gallup, to me, becomes a really important puzzle piece here, because even Cooks, who has played boundary X in his career, you could really argue that Cooks and Lamb are really at their best when they work to the multiple receiver side and they can be in motion. They can do those kinds of things as opposed to be static, because boundary X receivers are on the ball, so they're static. That's a different position. So I think Gallup is really, really important. But again, it comes down to how they see themselves and what they want their ultimate identity to be. Now, obviously, different opponents, you do different things on a weekly basis. But when you start through OTAs and training camp, it's not random. Oh, today we're just going to do this. Tomorrow we're going to do this. You have an approach and a philosophy that you want to build into your team. So when you get into those moments in games, you feel like, hey, here's how we can get back on track. This is what we practiced. This is what we do. And now we're going to get back on track.
So before we pivot to offensive line, and finish off the offense, is there anybody, because you're always great with this, Greg, is there anybody among the backups in either wide receivers or tight? Well, you talked about Schoonmaker, although I don't know that he's a backup now. Peyton Hendershot obviously steps into, I guess, a little bit bigger role with Ferguson, right?
Yeah, Ferguson is a guy they really like. So, he's probably going to be the number 1 tight end, until Schoonmaker develops a bit.
Good point. Okay. How about the wide receivers? Because I do recall this time last year, we talked a little bit about what potentially guys like Simi Fehoko could do.
Yep.
Rookie Jalen Tolbert was a rookie who didn't really add much of a presence, but we liked what he did in college.
Yeah, I mean, both Tolbert, who was a 3rd-round pick a year ago, big, long, athletic. I think maybe they expected more of him as a rookie. He was not a Power 5 player in college, so maybe it just takes time. Fehoko, to me, was fascinating. He came out of Stanford. Now, he was only a 5th-round pick, so again, we're not dealing with a high pick, but he is big and he could run. And again, he's been hurt a lot. Barring injury, Gallup, Cooks, and Lamb will be their top 3. So I don't know how they see these other guys. They could be struggling to make the roster. You never know. You know, we're not there. But Fehoko is 6'3" or so. He can run. I kind of thought there was a place for him in the league because there was a vertical ability with his size.
Mm. You know, Adam, just hearing him say that reminds me of doing this show with Greg last year, and he even started to laugh as he said, "A kid out of Stanford, 6'3", who could run," and we all thought we all made the JJ Arcega-Whiteside joke.
Well, you know, but and Arcega-Whiteside obviously is a second-round pick.
Yeah,
there's a place in the league for guys like Fehoko. I saw him at training camp last summer.
Mm-hmm.
He's got to be around 6'3.5", 6'4". I mean, he's got real good size. Yeah, I assume he's going to be he would back up Gallup, but you know, let's kind of before we get to defense, their offensive line's interesting, Greg. Tyler Smith shocked me filling in for Tyron Smith.
Me too.
I don't talk to offensive line coaches. They thought he was an interesting project. I don't think anyone expected him to play as well as he did. What are your thoughts on Tyler Smith? He's going to play left guard, by the way, this season.
Yeah, no, you hit it right on the head, Adam, because just watching his tape at Tulsa from last year, I thought there was no way he could step in and play a left tackle as a rookie, and he actually did pretty well. There was no questioning his athleticism and his feet. And the more people I talk to, particularly scouts who I respect, they always talk, hey, if you have feet at the tackle position, you can work with a lot of things. And he has feet, really good feet. But he did way better than I think we all thought.
Yeah.
And Adam, from people you talk to, I'm sure they said the same thing. So now Tyron Smith will be back at left tackle. Smith will move to left guard. They got a really solid offensive line because I thought Terrence Steele, when he played right tackle, was a solid right tackle. When he had to move to left tackle, he wasn't very good. But at right tackle, he was solid. So this is Geoff, it gets back to your point about the overall roster. This is a good offensive line.
Exactly where I was going to go.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Good.
Health is always the biggest factor. I mean, with a lot of teams, but especially this team, because they just haven't been able to keep their offensive line intact for 15, 16, 17 games. But if Tyron Smith can stay healthy, right, and Terrence Steele as well, I mean, they're pretty good.
Here's one thing I never know how to deal with, because to me, it's not it ends up, I have to see it after the fact, and then I see the issues. But the Cowboys are a classic team these last couple of years that have played really, really good football for the majority of, in most of their games. And then they get to the games we would deem important games, and for some reason they don't play well. I don't know how to, when I watch the tape, I can see why it happened, but I can't tell you the process that results in them not playing well. But that's, when you guys agree, that's kind of been the case. They have some really good games where you feel like, man, this team, I mean, there are stretches each of the last 2, 3, 4 years where people said the Cowboys are the best team in football.
Geoff said at the top here, the roster's really good. We'll get to the defense and
then you get to some of these quote unquote important games, and they just don't play well. And now, it's easy to put all that on Dak, but it's not just Dak.
We should mention Terrence Steele's come back from the ACL, which happened late last season, so he's got to get through training camp and see how that knee is. But the bottom line is, now they don't have very good depth at all in the offensive line. That's certainly an issue.
That's a good point.
Yeah, that would be a concern. But man, the talent left on this team, I got to give Jerry Jones and Will McClay credit. They've done a phenomenal job of drafting now. But as Greg said, Geoff, something seems to happen. I know Eagle fans love that because they seem to implode, but that's life in the big city and Big D.
Yeah. By the way, Matt Waletzko, their rookie backup tackle. Anything that jumped out about him? I'm sorry. Yeah, second year now. Anything that jumped out about him and when you were watching his tape in college?
I didn't do him.
You didn't do? I'm sorry, my fault.
I didn't. No, that's okay. I didn't. The kid I did do was Asim Richards from North Carolina.
Okay,
who was their round pick from this year, and I thought that he had traits, and thought that he could play in the league. Look, maybe they teach and coach offensive linemen exceptionally well, because look what happened to Tyler Smith a year ago.
Right.
So Richards does have the talent to play in the league. Whether it happens or not, that I can't answer. But he has the talent to play in the league.
Geoff, on Waletzko, it's interesting. He didn't go to North Dakota State. He went to North Dakota. There's a difference. Is that interesting? Because I don't know. Look, there are plenty of North Dakota State players in the league, but not a lot of North Dakota.
Yeah, we got South Dakota State, North Dakota State. Now, does South Dakota have a football team? Not South Dakota State. Is there a South Dakota?
Well, look, we know where Dallas Goedert went. South Dakota State.
That's right. All right. Let's transition to the defense, which again has a lot of talent. We'll talk about in a second. First, I want to remind everybody that it's Ocean Casino Resort's 5th birthday this summer. They can't wait to celebrate with you. Join Ocean for exciting promotions and sweepstakes, headline entertainment, the best day life and nightlife lineup in AC, the debut of the birthday bar, exclusive local collabs and partnerships, commemorative 5th birthday merchandise, and so much more. Don't miss stunning fireworks and unique events all summer long. Ocean Rewards members will enjoy over $5 million in gifts and prizes. So be sure to sign up for an Ocean Rewards card to get in on the fun next time you visit. All right, we're also going to hear a word for some other great sponsors, including our great friends at Sky Motor Cars.
Sky Motor Cars in Westchester is a different sort of dealership. All it takes is one look at their Highline pre-owned vehicles that people all over the country want and need. Owner Brett Schiller, make sure you don't spend a dime of your money before you purchase the car. Sky Motor Cars allows you to make all the decisions regarding your next vehicle. At Sky Motor Cars, you never have to spend more than necessary. Visit SkyMotorCars.com today or call 610-918-7225.
And if you stop into Sky Motor Cars out there in Westchester, PA, make sure you tell them Adam and Geoff sent you. You will get a great deal. All right, the Dallas Cowboys defense. This is Dan Quinn's 3rd year now with the team, correct? Is that right? 3rd year as defensive coordinator, Dan Quinn?
Third?
Sounds right.
Yeah, it sounds right.
Yeah, I think so. He's done a nice job, and they've stockpiled talent. I can't wait to get to the secondary because Jason Avant said something in an Inside the Birds podcast with me and Adam, Greg, that I'm going to want your opinion on. I agreed with it, but we'll first start with the defensive line. Now, we always talk about the Eagles, right? And what they do well is they stockpile defensive linemen, pass rushers. There's never too many. And it seems like the Cowboys are trying to adopt that mold as well. And you look at their front 6, they've got some guys who can rush the passer. They got some guys who can get dirty in the trenches. It obviously starts with Micah Parsons to Marcus Lawrence on the edges, O.C. Odigizua in the middle, along with their first-round pick, Greg, who you were a big fan of, and that's Mozzie Smith.
I was.
What did you like about Mozzie? I want you to repeat what you said about Mozzie, by the way.
Oh, well, Mozzie Smith is a big man who moves exceptionally well, really light feet for a 320-plus pound defensive tackle. So he played the game with athleticism and with strength and power. So I really, really liked his tape. He was not quite as good as Jalen Carter, but he wasn't that far away, given that he weighs 25 pounds more than Jalen Carter. So I really liked Mozzie Smith's tape an awful lot. He was a classic case, guys, and I talk about this all the time, particularly with defensive tackles, where you have to watch the tape and full games, because it's easy to look at a stat sheet and say, oh, well, he didn't have a lot of production. Well, I've learned over the years with defensive tackles that doesn't necessarily mean a lot. There's times I've seen a stat sheet before I put a tape on and see a defensive tackle with 1 tackle, and you think, oh, he didn't do much. Then you put the tape on and he dominated. He just other people made plays, but he dominated the people in front of him. Mozzie Smith had a lot of that. He had a lot of really good pass rush at Michigan where he didn't get a sack, but he just beat the guy in front of him. So, but Geoff, to get back to your point, which is a great one, you look at the depth on this D line. I mean, Sam Williams had big moments a year ago. He was a 2nd-round pick out of either Mississippi or Ole Miss. I forget, Mississippi State or Ole Miss, but he's Mississippi, Ole Miss. Yeah, he's a really good player who played both outside and inside. They have Hankins. They have Neville Gallimore. Dorrance Armstrong was really good a year ago. He played really well. They got a lot of positive snaps out of Chauncey Golston out of Iowa 2 years ago. I mean, this is a really deep defensive line with players that can both play inside and outside. So, you mentioned how the Eagles have done that. This is a really deep D line as well.
Greg, you've told us over the years that Dan Quinn's kind of evolved, more man coverage.
Yep.
Because we know a lot of Cowboys fans are listening. Give an overview, if you can, of what this defense conceptually looks like to you.
A couple of points. Number one, they hardly ever play with 3 linebackers. Last year, I think they only played about 6% of their snaps with 3 linebackers. When they went base, it was a big nickel. So that was their base defense. And big nickel means they played with 3 safeties. So they played with Hooker. They played with Donovan Wilson, a very good player, by the way, and Jaron Kearse. So that was their base defense, big nickel. Okay. So the evolution of Dan Quinn is this. For people who remember, he was the first of the Legion of Boom defensive coordinators. And that's when they played cover 3 almost all the time. And they played it at obviously a really, really high level with great players. And to play cover 3, you need a back end safety who can cover a lot of ground and make up for mistakes. And that was Earl Thomas. I remember having this conversation with Dan Quinn years ago and asked him, who's the most important player on the defense in Seattle? And he said, Earl Thomas, because he covers up for all the mistakes. So you need a great post safety to play cover 3 at a high level week in and week out. And they had one. But to get back to his evolution, where he's evolved is a ton more cover 1, which is man-to-man coverage with a post safety, but it's man. So a ton more cover 1, which is essentially what he's done the last 2 years in Dallas. They've been among the highest percentage defenses in the league playing cover 1. And what he started to do far more of last year, and it's all situational. That's what people need to remember. It's all situational. Is he started to play a lot more cover 2 because they could rush the quarterback. See, when you get pass rushers like Micah Parsons and, Lawrence was back healthy, you can rush the quarterback with 4 because cover 2 is totally dependent on your ability to impact the quarterback with 4.
I mean, I think you can make a pretty strong argument. He has he had a great secondary, right? That allowed guys like Michael Bennett and Cliff Averill and Irvin in Seattle to flourish. Those guys weren't 12 to 15 sack a year type of guys, but now between Lawrence and Micah Parsons, you mentioned Sam Williams on the come up. I mean, with the pass rushers he has, I think that makes a lot more sense for him to want to play some cover 2. He can get home with 4, and then we'll see if Mozzie Smith can develop into a pass rusher as well.
Yeah, and they'll play a lot of what we call jet fronts or NASCAR or cheetah fronts, whatever you want to call that, where you're in a sense playing with 4 defensive ends in long yardage situations, because Sam Williams at his core is a defensive end, but he played inside last year before he got hurt. Armstrong can line up anywhere in a sub front. So of course they did, the key thing here, because they do play a lot of man, and that's why they went and got Stephon Gilmore, because Stephon Gilmore has built a career on being a man-to-man corner. And while he may not be exactly the same as he was 4 or 5 years ago, and I forget what year he was the defensive player of the year, but he was playing a ton of man in New England, he still has the mentality and the ability to line up and play man coverage on the outside.
That was the addition that Jason Avant told us he thought really pushed Dallas's offseason over the top, because he said even if Stephon Gilmore isn't what he was when he won Defensive Player of the Year, you're talking about the difference between him and what Dallas was getting from either Kelvin Joseph or Anthony Brown or Jordan. It's like almost night and day. He said Gilmore's presence is going to allow Dan Quinn to be so much more selective, aggressive when he wants to be, and just round out this defense, Greg.
I would agree with that 100%, because they really struggled at the corner position opposite Diggs a year ago, playing a lot of different people. Nashawn Wright, Kelvin Joseph. They ended up playing Deron Bland outside, and Deron Bland actually had an outstanding year playing in the slot, a really, really good season. And my guess is he'll be their slot corner once again. But they ended up playing him on the outside because the other players they put out there just did not do the job. So the Gilmore situation, bringing in Gilmore, and I agree with Jay, that really stabilizes what Dan Quinn has been all about with this defense over the last 2 years.
Greg, when you break down Trevon Diggs, what do you see from him? Because he makes a lot of headlines, makes a lot of big plays, but is he a consistent enough player?
He does get beat because he's a keyer and a cluer, and he jumps routes. I mean, we saw the Eagles attack him. I think the second play of the game with A.J. Brown, was that the Minshew game or was that the Hurts game? I forget. But it was they attacked him on the second play of the game with a slant and go, sluggo, as we call it, because they know that Diggs, he jumps routes. That's his game. So he'll get beat every once in a while, but you're still going to say he's a quality NFL corner. He's not a stiff out there. He just, that's the way he plays, and he makes plays doing that.
That was the Hurts game, because the first game was Hurts versus Cooper Rush, and then the second game wound up being Minshew versus Dak. So neither starters faced each other.
Right, but I do remember it was, I think, the second or third play of the game Jeff, do you remember? You probably remember the play.
Yeah, because the Eagles went up big, and then Dallas sort of. Though the Eagles went up in that game, and then Dallas sort of shifted to a running attack, and then an intermediary tight end attack, and started to claw their way back.
And that's a classic case where you don't have to set Diggs up. From film study, he does. It's like when people say, "Well, you got to establish the run." Well, teams that run the ball really well don't have to establish the run. That's been established already by how teams prepare. So when you play Trevon Diggs, you don't have to set him up to jump routes. That's how he plays. So the Eagles went and they did that on the second play of the game.
So Greg, you talked about how they play two linebackers. So the kid Overshone is not to your classic 250-pound linebackers in the 220. So I guess he fits what they want to do.
Yeah, he won't start because they still have Van Der Esch and Damone Clark, who missed that entire season when I guess it was a neck injury, Adam, if I recall. It was discovered at the combine, and he had to sit out the one whole season. But he came on and played last year toward, the second half of the season, and he played well. So my guess is you're going to see Van Der Esch and Clark as the starters. And then they have athletic backups in Overshone, who they drafted this year, and Jabril Cox, who was a fourth-round pick out of LSU in 2021. He is long. He's athletic. He can run. He's really more of a sub-defense player. So the question is, does he replace someone like Van Der Esch, in the sub defenses and play with Clark? And they're both out of LSU, actually. But I'd be curious to see if that happens because Cox is a long, athletic guy.
Let me ask you, because a couple of years ago, Greg, it looked like the linebackers were really, when they had they obviously had Jalen Smith and Leighton Vander Esch playing at a really high level, kind of came down. Vander Esch just had to deal with injuries. The Cowboys tend to be a little bit lighter up front. I mean, Mozzie Smith is 330 now, but Odigizua. Odigizua. He's about 280, right? 290. He's on the lighter side.
Yeah.
Do you think they for the linebackers that's an issue for them being kept clean? Is that something you've seen on tape? Is that they have to take on a lot of big bodies?
Well, at some point you always have to. And Van Der Esch, that's why he plays. I mean, he's 255 pounds. So, we'll see. Maybe that's one reason they drafted Mozzie Smith, because they wanted to get bigger and stronger up front. Certainly Hankins is there. This is one of those teams where they have so many guys up front that we have to almost wait and see who makes the roster.
Right.
They're not going to be carrying, 12 defensive linemen. So some of these guys we're talking about right now might not make the roster.
We didn't even mention Dante Fowler Jr., right? He's part of that rotation at the moment.
Dan's guy from Atlanta. Yeah.
He was the third pick in the draft the year he came out.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So we've wrapped up the defense here, wrapped up the offense. Let's finish off this preview. We're not going to talk about the long snapper this time, Adam, but how this team matches up against the Eagles. We always say there's very few teams that have either an offensive line that can match up with the Eagles D line, or a defensive line that can match up with against the Eagles offensive line. But I think Dallas is one of those teams where, again, I don't know if they've reached Eagles level yet. We'll talk about the Eagles in the next podcast. I do feel like their defense has taken a little bit of a hit, and we'll have to see. But certainly, is there a matchup that favors Dallas at all to you, Greg?
Well, I mean, Dallas is real. It's getting back to your initial point, Jeff. Dallas does not really have a significant weakness, where you'd go, oh my God, that's really bad. I mean, obviously we talked about what their offense will look like. We don't know the answer to that. As much as I like Mozzie Smith, he's still a rookie. We don't know how many snaps he's going to play every game. We don't know the answer to that question. Defensively, at linebacker, Damone Clark, I think, is going to be the guy. Played well last year, but now if he's the full-time starter, we'll see. We'll see if they continue to play big nickel as their base. They have more linebackers now. So there's questions here.
Right.
But I don't think they have a defined weakness where you say, man, they can't compete with the Eagles. To me, they can compete with the Eagles, which doesn't mean they're going to beat the Eagles, but they can compete with the Eagles. Look, I'm trying to remember the games last year. Hurts. It was never Hurts versus Prescott last year, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. So I mean, it's tough to look at last year as any barometer by which you can make a determination about this year. It's just, it gets back to the point I made, and I don't have a brilliant answer for this. sometimes in these games that are deemed really critical, important games, the Cowboys just don't play well, and I don't know why.
Yeah. No, it's a good point. And we have to wait quite a while for these teams to come at each other because they don't play for the first time until week 9
Oh,
this
okay.
year. Yeah. In fact, the Eagles were up 20-0 in that first game, and then Dallas sort of switched. I remember they went heavy up front. They started to play a lot more 12 personnel. They ran the ball. They played off play action and used Lamb over the middle. And that's where, as we talk about matchups, I mean, we're going to get into this Eagles. The Eagles lost a lot defensively up the middle. And maybe this sort of new look Dallas offense, when they play the Eagles, will feel that that's their strength. Let's go big. Let's hit them up the middle. Let's see if, Jordan Davis can stay on the field. And let's see if they can cover our interior weapons.
Did Avonte Maddox miss one of those games? Because somehow,
second game.
yeah, because somehow I remember CD Lamb having a lot of success, and it
yeah.
wasn't against Maddox.
Correct. That was the second game, I believe.
Yeah.
That
I
Dallas
think Josiah
won.
Scott was playing in the slot at that point, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong, but I think.
Correct.
Yeah, everybody had that was a 40-34 game, so a lot of offensive players.
There was a lot of
success
offense in that game, and
Yeah.
and Lamb had a huge game in that game numbers wise.
Yes, definitely. All right. Speaking of the Eagles, we'll finish off this 4-part series with them. We will wrap it up and talk about them in the next podcast. So for Greg Cosell, Adam Caplan, I'm Geoff Mosher. You've just listened to the Dallas Cowboys preview as part of our 4-part NFC East Preview Series. As always, we thank you for flying with us inside the bird.